Welcome to Zen Money Monday, weekly conversations with innovators, thought leaders, and entrepreneurial junkies about building good businesses, exploring what the idea of Zen money really means, and how to achieve it. With your host, author, business strategist, and Zen Money CFO, Liz LaJoy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Zen Money Monday. If you missed last week's episode, I was speaking with Ritu Goswami, who's a productivity coach and an attorney, and we were talking about how to utilize and stay productive in these stressful times and what it's like to run two businesses at the same time and a whole lot of other great stuff. It was a very wide-ranging conversation. If you want to check that out, you can go to zenmoneymap.com/044 to catch that episode. And today I want to talk to you about rocking your contract to cash cycle. What do I mean by that? So no matter your business type, whether you're selling widgets in a storefront or working with people and selling your brain for a living, which many of you are in the online space or in the offline space, there is a process whereby we talk to some potential people who are interested. At some point, they raise their hand, and this kicks off our contract to cash cycle. Basically, that means what are we doing for client onboarding? What are we doing to get a contract in place for your services or your sale of goods? And that can look a bunch of different ways and still be totally legal, so don't panic. But what are we doing in terms of getting that documentation in order? What are we doing in terms of getting you paid? And can we make that process as streamlined and easy for you to manage or someone in your team to manage as possible? So here are some things I want you to think about. We often get into this, yay, I want to work with somebody. Woo, woo, woo. We're match made in heaven. Let's get going. This happens a lot, especially for coaches and creatives and people who are getting started. I think this kind of winds itself out as you've been going for a little bit of a while. But we know that we're supposed to have documentation. We know we're supposed to have some kind of contract. But sometimes it just feels like a big old hassle. I want to try to encourage you to see the contracting process as a really brilliant client communication tool, because what that piece of paper or that Adobe sign document or the click off of the yes, I agree to these terms and conditions, whatever your version is, or what you may have multiple versions within your business depending on what you're selling. That process actually helps solidify your client relationship. So if done well, this doesn't have to be a point where you're like, we're going, and now we have to stop and deal with this stupid paperwork stuff. I would much rather have you think about this as, this is how I actually show up as a professional. People are going to take me more seriously if I take this portion seriously for myself. And it's not just about you protecting your business at the expense of the client. The beauty of most contract language is that it just very clearly lays out expectations and kind of the rules of the road in terms of what your relationship is going to be going forward. So from that perspective, it's a really important document to pay attention to make sure that both you and your client understand what's going on in there, and to get it in place during your onboarding and not have to, be like, oh yeah, we started working, but we forgot to get the contract. By the way, can you sign this? Right? If we do that, we're showing people a couple things. When we're showing them that we don't take ourselves and our business as seriously as we might, we're also showing them that because of that, maybe we're not taking the services we're providing them as seriously. I know that's not true. That's not true, but there's a perception around this. So I want you to think about if you've ever or are currently in the, I just don't want to deal with this part of it, to just try to spin that conversation from ugh to, hey, this is a really great opportunity to verify, what am I actually doing for people? What do I expect to get paid? When do I expect to get paid? What happens if I don't deliver, right? What happens? What can the client stand on? How long are we going to do this? Are we going to do this month by month? Is this a one-time thing? What happens if we get into an argument or somebody decides, like if your client decides not to pay you, what recourses do you have? And vice versa if they're upset with the services provided, right? Having a document in place just puts you that much on much more solid foundation for whatever might come down the pipe, because we always want to have the best relationships with our clients and our customers possible. But there are those times where sometimes we need to be able to fall back on the contract language. And I hope that you're never in a position where you have to do that. But personally, in the 20 plus years that I've been doing various forms of business, occasionally things get to that point where they have to go to small claims court, where they have to even get to litigation. And that can be a really stressful thing. And if you don't have a solid contract in place that says very specifically what you will and will not do and what the client will and will not do, it makes that version of, when things really go down the toilet, hard to manage. So it's a cover your butt on the front end, yes, but here's where I really like it. As I said, it's a great client communication tool because it gives you an opportunity to sit down and say, hey, here's what we talked about verbally. It's my understanding of it. Let me know if you have any questions. And a lot of times clients will come back and be like, oh, I didn't realize that you were going to be doing X for me. That's great, because it was written out in the contract and they read it before they signed it, and sometimes people like to sit down and review the contract together. Again, it's one more version of bonding with a new potential client and ensuring that they understand everything that you're proposing to do for them and what your expectations are for them. So I'll use, we have a lot of design clients, for example, and there's often a misunderstanding around, from a client's perspective, of like what can happen when. And in design, you have really specific milestones. If I need you, the client, to sign off on this next stage before we can move forward. And if clients aren't doing that, designers often have to chase them down. The projects get pushed off. Their timelines get all messed up. They can't take on new projects because they're waiting for this other thing. And so there's a lot of juggling that needs to happen in the design business because of that. Whereas if you can sit down really clearly on the front end and have it be very clear, great, we're super excited. Once we get to this milestone, we really need you to turn around your review of this within X number of days so that we can keep on this schedule. If you can't do that, no problem, but we are going to have to adjust the schedule and sometimes the fee. So those are just considerations around how to use a contract to be a communication tool with your client. I think that in this day and age, having that be really streamlined, and you can use systems like Adobe Sign or DocuSign, or like I said, sometimes we can even just do a point and click checkbox. Let's say somebody has, paid X dollars to have a call with you, right? Just an hour of your time for X dollars, and they're paying it. And maybe we book it through Acuity or Calendly or some other kind of calendar platform. Well, you can actually include, a form that they have to fill out when they're signing up for that. That includes a little checkbox that says, I agree to these terms and conditions, with a little link, and the link goes to a page, a back-end page on your website or somewhere, a landing page that has your version of terms and conditions for that kind of work, right? These are ways that we can have our legal ducks in a row without there having to be like, hey, I want to pick your brain for an hour and I want to pay you for it, and now I have to wait 6 weeks until we get a contract in place, right? There's a lot of different versions and ways to streamline this process depending on your business type and depending on what you have going on. My biggest concern that I see out in the online space right now is that a lot of people, not everybody, of course, but many people get out there and just start selling services, and there's not a term and condition or any kind of contract language in place anywhere. There's nothing on the website. There's nothing, connected to actually the buy button. So when you click buy, there's all of this landing page language and sales page language, but that's not the same as you having a legal backbone behind you for the work that you're doing. It's a little bit, but there's all these other things that aren't referenced in that kind of copy. So I just want you to be thinking about, where do I have contracts? What am I selling in what form? So that you can be tracking this, because many of us also have different versions. So maybe you do one-on-one work, and that includes a very specific individualized contract that you take time to prep and send and get signed before you, take an initial deposit or something like that. But then maybe you're also selling a low ticket tripwire, or maybe not even tripwire, but low ticket, like canned program or something like that, where people literally are just buying online. We just want to make sure there's some backup somewhere along that client journey where you're tagging into legal documentation. A couple of things as to why we care about this. Obviously, we think in terms of like, it's going to keep me out of, from having to go to court. Yes, that's true. But it's also really important for your insurance providers. They want to make sure that you have correct contract language, because if you get sued, especially if you're a professional service provider, then if we have the right contract language in place, that can help minimize insurance payouts. So they have a vested interest in what contract language you're using. And some insurance providers say, hey, we'll cover you, but if you don't use this contract language or some version of this contract language, then it's moot, right? It's invalid. And so just be really clear on those ticky-tacky details in terms of, are you covered? And are you using this in the right way? And are you making sure that there's an opportunity for the client to say, yes, I agree. A lot of times if you're selling things through an online platform like Kajabi or Kartra or things like that, you can have a little checkbox when they check out that says, yes, I agree to these terms and conditions. Some people ignore those. I would really recommend you look through your options with that, or have somebody on your team look through and walk through with you what you could be showing and what you couldn't be showing. We all know that there's a lot of things we have to be doing in terms of the, like email protocols and all of that. Your contracts for your services, equally, if not more important. I'll just say equally important but from this perspective for today's conversation, I just want to make sure that you have everything you need to have that language in place so that you can move forward feeling really great about the services, because you're like, hey, we onboarded you. Part of that is signing the contract. Let's move forward. Okay. Enough about that. But the next piece of the puzzle, obviously, is we want the contract in place and we want to be really clear on how and when people pay you. This is the second part of the contract to cash cycle. People raise their hand, we get the documentation in place in one way or another, and then we need to be really clear on how and when the money is coming in. So a couple different scenarios here. I'll go back to the design firm, for example, as an example. So a lot of times those contracts look like, here's what the total is, and then we're going to break it out in a deposit of maybe 40 or 50%, maybe 30%, depending on the kind of business. And then we're going to invoice you or bill you as we go along. So maybe there's an initial deposit that you get in hand before you even start working. And I really recommend that, because it's incredible how many people who balk at paying the deposit, they tend to also balk at paying you in a timely manner in general, even if they've signed the contract. So we want to get some kind of monies right up front. And how are we going to do that? Are we sending an invoice that they're able to pay online? Are they paying by check? Are you giving them some other version where they're signing up online and it's kind of happening a little automatically? You put in your credit card and you're off to the races. There's so many different platforms and systems that can help you with that. And a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about some of those in terms of being able to manage this part of your system. I'll talk to you about that in a second. But from a payment standpoint, I want you to be really clear on, how do you typically get paid? So there's kind of the old school model, which was, we'll do the work, we'll invoice you, and then you'll pay us, hopefully within 30 days, but maybe longer, depending on the contract and how long it takes people to actually write the check. And then there's the newer school model, which is, we'll agree to work together. You'll pay me either entirely up front or in sort of a partial payment system, like I was discussing earlier. And we're off to the races. So that second version, the new school model, is pretty cool because it really helps with your cash flow. The downside is if you get paid everything up front and it's a really big contract, we can spend that money and then still be working on that project months later and be like, oh no, the money's gone, but we still have to outlay for subconsultants and project expenses and things like that. That's a topic for another day. But in general, I just want you to be really clear on, what are your payment options for people? Because there's the traditional service model that we were just discussing, but then there's this online programs, coaching, sales model where a lot of times it's, okay, you can come and work with me for, X dollars and you can pay it all up front. Or if you want to spread it out over 2 or 3 payments, then we're going to bump up the price by 10 or 20%, which I love because, there's value to that cash not being in your hand right out of the gate. If we're going to go that version, I just want you to be thinking through, how clear is it for people to be able to make those choices? Are you selling them on a call? In which case, are we sending them to a landing page where they just click and say, yes, I'm going to do the pay in full option versus the 3 pay option? Okay. Then on that landing page or somewhere behind there, as they go and check out, we want to have those terms and conditions. And then that should catalyst something in your system that says, hey, we have a new person and now we have to continue the onboarding process. So a lot of times we think about client onboarding as they're in, now we've got to get them accustomed to working together, right? We have to bring them into a Facebook group. We have to give them access to our program in Kajabi. We have to make sure that they, are in the right Slack channel so we can start working with them. That's the third tier from my perspective when it comes to your contract to cash cycle, or onboarding cycle, I should say, because we need to do the contract to cash stuff first and get that really clear for you. So what I would love for you guys to think about this week is, how are we dealing with the languaging of contracting? Is it feeling overwhelming? If it is, there is definitely a way to take off some of that pressure and streamline things for yourself. I talk about this a lot in my first book, From Zero to Zen. And if it's feeling good, just think about, are there any holes anywhere in that process that are causing clients, and this is where analysis is fun, to go back and say, where was there a hiccup, right? If you can look back and say, wow, we get to this point where when we're sending the contract out, then it takes people 3 to 4 days to even respond back and say, ooh, I've got a question about that. And they're not signing immediately, right? That to me triggers a little red flag that says, what's going on in that process that maybe we could help speed that along? Does it require you or your assistant or somebody else in your team to be reaching out and saying, hey, just wanted to make sure that you got that contract. Please let us know if you have any questions. We're really looking forward to working with you, right? That little thing can sometimes make the difference between having somebody sit on a contract for a week or 2 weeks and actively stay in the moment with you in terms of, yes, I want to work with you and move forward. Because that's one of the issues with writing an individual contract, that a lot of people resist it because somebody has raised their hand, you've had a call with them, they're all excited, and then you get into this nitty gritty stuff and the momentum fades, right? And so then you might be like, oh, I'm losing them. Or if I'm not losing them, then I'm at least not getting going with them. And that, then we have to schedule around that and stuff. So there are things that you can do to help continue to streamline that process. But the first thing we have to do is identify what's going on. How many different ways are you contracting and getting paid by people? Again, some people might have some point and click versions. You might also write individual contracts. A lot of people like to use platforms like Dubsado, which allows you to kind of do a proposal and make it pretty, and then attach a contract to it, and then also send out invoices, right? There's a lot of kind of project management type stuff around contracting that's available out there. There are plenty of other platforms that do this as well. Some people, if the business is appropriate, we do this with a couple of our clients where we're actually helping do that on a more granular, every contract is written separately kind of way because of the nature of the contracts, the price point of the contracts. We need to make sure that those are really accurate individually. So there's a little bit more hands-on, but there is a process to getting those out, to tracking them, to making sure that questions are answered and that people are coming on when they need to come on. And then the next piece of the puzzle after that, and after we get our at least initial deposit in, and again, cannot stress this enough, please don't start working until you have at least some money in hand. Because it's really the worst part about business. Okay, one of the worst parts about business is chasing people down for money. Nobody on either side of that equation ever feels good about it. So if we can avoid that by being very clear and positive and communicating well on the front end, the money's going to come in much more easily. You're not going to have to waste time doing that chasing, and life is just going to feel rosier in general. And then once those pieces are done, we move immediately into, great, we're signed up. Here's the link to book your first call. Here's the next expectations. We'll be reaching out, whatever's going on. The next piece of after they sign the contract should be, hey, client, let me give you a really specific expectation about what the next steps are here, because you've just put down a bunch of money. I don't want you to feel like now you're out in a black hole somewhere, right? So this is where we can help our clients as well, not feel like, great, I signed up and now I'm getting pushed to the side because they're distracted selling somebody else. So just this week, list out everything that you're selling from an offer standpoint. List out how the contract looks for that. Is it a terms and conditions click? If you don't have anything set up, make a note that you're going to set something up. Are you writing an individual contract? Do you have a template contract that just goes out through a system where they enter their own name and address? What does that look like? What are your payment terms? Are we getting a deposit? Are we only getting paid up front? Are we getting paid up front or a 2 or 3 payment option? Oh, quick on that. I don't love offering a bunch of different options. I would recommend you either say whatever the length of the thing is. Let's say you're working with somebody for 8 weeks, right? No more than 3 payments because you want to be paid by the time you're done with that 8-week process. So you might take the first initial payment on the day that you agree to work together, another one a month later, another month later, and then your 8 weeks, probably because of scheduling, will end up closing a little bit after that last payment comes in. So I know a lot of people like to do you could pay twice, or you could pay 3 times, or you can pay in full. That's a lot of options. It's way better for you to stand strong and say, here's how I do business, and have just 2 choices. And you can mess with that too. And I talk about this in other podcasts as well. You can mess with that in terms of, do you want to have consistent cash flow because you're not feeling strapped, or do you want to encourage people to take the one pay option, right? And depending on how you phrase that to people and depending on the discount for the one pay option, you might be able to, bring in a bunch of cash right up front if that's your goal, by phrasing it in terms of, you can pay in full for this amount, you can pay in full for $10,000, or 2 payments of $7,500. A lot of people will go, well, I'm going to save $5,000. Sure. Right. Here's 10 grand right up front. That might seem like a big number, but adjust accordingly to what your pricing structure is right now. I don't mean to overwhelm you with that. Anyway, I hope that this is useful to think about in terms of how to make sure and be very cognizant and comprehensive around, what does it look like to a client when they start talking with you? What does it look like to you for the business to make sure that your ducks are in a row from a contract standpoint and from a getting paid standpoint? And the last thing to remember is, if you were actively taking credit card numbers from people like on a live call and then running their card after the fact, which is something that I do actually, because I want people to review my contract before I actually charge them. So I just tell them, I'll keep this on file until you've signed, and then we'll go ahead and run it. If you're collecting that information, it needs to be safe, secure, and not laying around for people to grab. So if you ever write that down by hand, none of that paperwork should ever go in the recycling bin. Burn it, shred it, eat it, throw it in the garden. Just make sure that we're protecting our clients' data in this process as well, because they want to know that, 1, we're professional, and 2, we're taking care of them. And your contract to cash cycle can actually help bolster that feeling if we're really clear about the steps and what the process that the client goes through and what we need to do to make sure that it's all flowing smoothly. I hope that that's helpful. Next week, I am going to be talking with Alex Steed, who is a video production expert, and we're going to be talking about video for the new world, what it's been like to build a business with a partner over the last decade. We're going to get into a lot of good stuff. So if you want to check that out, stay tuned. And in the meantime, have a fantastic day. Hey, are you ready to go from 0 to Zen around your finances? I really believe that knowing what to do and when with your business finances can relieve a ton of stress and anxiety for us. If you want to finally learn how to take control of your money management with ease and confidence, I promise, then my brand new 8-module program, done at your own pace with small, actionable exercises and resources for you, might be a really fantastic fit. And because you are a listener and you have been supporting me in this podcast, I want to offer it to you for a really special price. So if you want to check out how to learn best financial practices, help your business thrive, build your business management muscle, you can check that out at zenmoneymap.com/podcast offer. I hope you enjoy it and it takes you where you want to go from a financial Zen feeling kind of way. Did you like this episode of Zen Money Monday? I would love to hear from you. If you want to submit a review of this podcast, all you have to do is visit ratethispodcast.com/Zen Money to let us know what you think. Would love to hear your feedback.